This is Raging Bull, and it's a coaster we gotta talk about. This coaster is one of the best ever made. It has one of the most insane moments of airtime to ever exist, and it's surprisingly controversial. See, Raging Bull is a massive Ball of Grit Maveyard or B&M hypercoaster operating at Six Flags Great America. This coaster is rather unique amongst the B&M hypers out there because it utilizes a twister layout instead of the traditional out and back layout. So let's go in depth on this coaster. I'm gonna quickly go over its history, then I'm gonna go over the ride experience, and finally I'll end the video off by talking about why it's so controversial. So, Six Flags Great America has worked with B&M since they were founded. Great America was home to B&M's first coaster, a stand-up coaster named Iron Wolf, which opened in 1990 and stood where Goliath stands today. Only 2 years later, in 1992, Great America again worked with B&M on Batman the Ride, which was the world's first inverted roller coaster, or a roller coaster where the train runs underneath the track. Batman proved to be an incredible success for the park, so in 1999, Great America again worked with B&M to create Raging Bull. Raging Bull was the second coaster created using B&M's now famous hypercoaster model. It was nearly the first, but it got beaten by Apollo's Chariot at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, which opened like 2 months before it. Raging Bull is still arguably the standout coaster at Great America, and for good reason. This coaster is amazing, and to understand why it's so amazing, I think we should go through the entire ride experience. The ride starts with a massive 202-foot tall lift hill, and then you go down the first drop. This first drop is the greatest first drop ever created. If you're in the back row, you get yanked out of your seat with seconds of insanely strong airtime. You are fully in the air from the beginning of the drop all the way to the end. The restraints are also super roomy, so it feels like you have a ton of space to move, and that makes it kind of unnerving how much airtime you get during this drop. As I previously said, this drop is the best first drop on any coaster that I have ridden. It's better than Skyrush, it's better than El Toro, and it's even better than Iron Rattler. Now, this drop goes into a tunnel, which causes the drop to be 208 feet long, even though the coaster only stands 202 feet tall. After this drop is a big turnaround, and that's followed by an airtime hill that is unfortunately trimmed. It still delivers really good airtime though, and that's followed by a big ol' wave turn and then a hammerhead turn. Neither of these elements are particularly forceful, but there is some decent airtime coming out of that big ol' wave turn. There's no airtime to be found on the hammerhead turn though, although it is still a good element. That hammerhead turn takes you into the mid-course brake run, and that slows you down a little, but not much. The drop off this brake run is another really good airtime moment, and it also signals the beginning of the second half. Speaking of the second half, we're getting into the second half of this video, and if you're enjoying it so far, hitting the like button helps out so much. This second half is where the coaster becomes more like a twister coaster or a type of roller coaster that has many turns. This section starts off with an alright airtime hill, and then a turn that goes around the first drop. That turn ends with a decent drop into a section of low to the ground turns that's super weird for a B&M hyper. Weird doesn't mean bad though, because this section is one of the most fun parts on the ride. I'm not sure why, but I love unique or out of the ordinary moments on roller coasters like this. It's always so fun to see stuff being different. After this section, you hit the brakes, and then your journey on Raging Bull comes to an end. Something that's very important to note is that every mention of airtime comes with the requirement that you are in the very back row. Even the second to back row has weaker airtime, so if you find yourself in the queue for this coaster, make sure you wait extra for the back. It's worth it, I promise you. This is especially worth it because you've probably already been waiting a good amount of time for this coaster, because Raging Bull typically has one of the longest lines in the park. This isn't because of bad capacity, nor is it because of bad operations, at least on my last visit. It's just because of how many people love this ride, and for good reason. It's easily the best ride in the park. That being said, historically, there have been a vocal group of people who majorly dislike this coaster. These people claim that this coaster doesn't have any airtime, or dislike it because it's different from the more modern B&M hypers. Remember that ending part with all the low to the ground turns? Actually, just remember all the turns. These are the elements that these people don't like. And to an extent, I can see where they're coming from. When you think of a B&M hyper, you think of one big airtime hill after another in a super simple out and back layout. Those coasters like Mako here do admittedly have more airtime than Raging Bull. Not that Raging Bull doesn't have airtime though. Whoever claims that Raging Bull doesn't deliver airtime was either not riding in the back row or was on some kind of drugs, because there's no possible way of thinking that this coaster doesn't have airtime unless you passed out on the lift hill and didn't come to all the way until you were on the twister section at the end, which is still a fun section. People get so up in arms when a coaster doesn't have airtime for a little while. It's something that grinds my gears so much because not having airtime doesn't make or break a ride. Coasters can be fun with airtime and they can be fun without airtime. And it's not like Raging Bull doesn't have airtime. Let me remind you about the fact that the drop on this coaster is the best drop out of any coaster in the world. I'm getting too heated for this, so let's calm down and talk about a Raging Bull fun fact. Did you know that Great America's original plan when looking to add a hyper was to add a Mr. Freeze clone? That didn't happen, obviously, but what if it did? To see if Mr. Freeze is a good ride, my video on it is right there.